हे हिंदू शक्ति संभूत दीप्तितम तेजा, हे हिंदू शक्ति संभूत दीप्तितम तेजा, हे हिंदू तपस्या पूत ईश्वरी ओजा, हे हिंदू श्री सौभाग्य भूतीच्या साजा, हे हिंदू नृसिंहा प्रभो शिवाजी राजा, हे हिंदू नृसिंहा प्रभो शिवाजी राजा. Welcome to Raje for Life. I am Shalaka. In the last story, we saw how Shivaji Maharaj defeated a more powerful Afzal Khan with clever planning. Shivaji Maharaj also had another great ability. He inspired people to do the right thing. His vision and love for his people gave him a following of brave and loyal people. Shivaji Maharaj always found the best in them and treated them like his own family. This story tells us about one such brave warrior whose loyalty for Shivaji Maharaj and Swarajya is admired even today. In the western Ghats of India stood a majestic fort called Panhalgad. Panhalgad was under Shivaji Maharaj's rule. This fort was surrounded by tall hills and deep valleys. Shivaji Maharaj's enemy, Adil Shah, wanted to conquer this fort. Siddhi Jauhar was a powerful commander in Adil Shah's army. Siddhi Jauhar brought a huge army to Panhalgad. His soldiers carried swords, spears, cannons, and supplies for a long battle. They surrounded the fort, blocking food and water from reaching the Marathas inside. Siddhi Jauhar was a patient man. He didn't attack the fort right away. Instead, he waited, knowing that hunger and thirst would weaken the Marathas. "Let them grow tired and desperate," he told his soldiers. "Then we will strike." Days turned into weeks, and the Marathas inside Panhalgad began running out of food and water. Shivaji Maharaj knew that if they stayed, everyone would be in great danger. But escaping wasn't easy. The enemy soldiers were everywhere. Siddhi Jauhar was not only a warrior, but also a master of strategy. He spread spies and informers across the area to track Shivaji Maharaj's movements. "If he tries to escape, we'll catch him," he said confidently. He even tried to trick the Marathas by pretending to negotiate peace. But Shivaji Maharaj was too smart to fall for his traps. He knew that Siddhi Jauhar's real goal was to capture him. Shivaji Maharaj came up with a clever plan. He decided to secretly leave the fort at night and head to another safe fort called Vishalgarh. But someone had to stay back at Panhalgad to trick the enemy and fight them if needed. That's when a brave warrior named Bajiprabhu Deshpande stepped forward. Bajiprabhu was one of Shivaji Maharaj's most loyal commanders. He was known for his loyalty, sharp mind, brave spirit, and ability to lead men into battle. For Baji, protecting his king and the Marathi dream of freedom was more important than his own life. He said, "Maharaj, you go to safety. I'll stay here and fight the enemy with all my strength. When you reach Vishalgarh, fire a cannon to signal that you have reached safely." That night, when the moon hid behind the clouds, Shivaji Maharaj and a small group of soldiers quietly slipped out of Panhalgad. They moved carefully through the mountains on foot, making sure that the enemy didn't spot them. Back at the fort, Bajiprabhu and about 300 warriors prepared for a big fight. They knew they were outnumbered, but their hearts were full of courage. They believed in Shivaji Maharaj's dream of freedom and were ready to give their all to protect him. Bajiprabhu led his men to a narrow mountain pass called Ghorkind. This was the only way the enemy could follow Shivaji Maharaj. The pass was surrounded by steep cliffs, and only a few people could walk through it at a time. "This is where we'll stop them," Bajiprabhu told his men. "We must fight until we hear the sound of the cannon fire from Vishalgarh. That will mean that Maharaj has reached safely." The men nodded, their swords and shields ready. They were scared, but they trusted Bajiprabhu and knew that they were fighting for a great cause. When Siddhi Jauhar realized that Shivaji Maharaj had escaped, he was furious. "Follow them!" he roared. His soldiers rushed after the Marathas, but they were stopped at Ghodkhind by Bajiprabhu's soldiers, just as the sun was beginning to rise. Bajiprabhu and his men charged forward, their swords gleaming in the sunlight. The Marathas fought like tigers, their small numbers forcing the enemy soldiers to struggle through the small valley. The steep cliffs prevented the enemy from surrounding them. Instead, the battle was fought head-on, with each Maratha warrior taking down many enemy soldiers. The narrow pass echoed with the clash of swords, the thud of shields, and the cries of battle. The enemy soldiers seemed endless, but Bajiprabhu and his men stood their ground. Bajiprabhu was at the front, fighting like a lion. "Hold the line!" he shouted, his voice booming over the noise of battle. Bajiprabhu was everywhere, his sword moving like lightning. He fought at the front, inspiring his men with his bravery. The enemy soldiers tried to focus their attacks on him, but Baji dodged and countered with incredible skill. His sword flashed in the sunlight as he pushed back wave after wave of enemy soldiers. The enemy was surprised. How could so few men fight so bravely? But Bajiprabhu and his warriors didn't give up. They held the pass. Hours passed and the battle raged on. Many of Bajiprabhu's men were wounded and some had fallen. Baji himself had cuts and bruises all over, but he kept fighting. His voice thundered over the battlefield, encouraging his men. As the hours passed, the Maratha warriors began to get tired, but they knew that they couldn't stop. Every minute they held the pass brought Shivaji Maharaj closer to safety. This enemy's commanders, frustrated by the delay, pushed their soldiers harder. "Break through!" they shouted. But the narrow pass allowed only a few soldiers to fight at a time, and the Marathas used the terrain to their advantage. Bajiprabhu himself had taken several wounds, but he kept fighting. Blood dripped from a deep cut on his shoulder, but he ignored the pain. His focus was on the battle and the signal they awaited, the sound of the cannon fire from Vishalgarh. The enemy sent one final massive wave of soldiers. The Marathas were pushed back slightly, and for a moment, it seemed like the battle was lost. But just then, as the sun began to set, a loud boom echoed through the mountains. It was the sound of cannon fire from Vishalgarh. Shivaji Maharaj had made it safely. Hearing this, Bajiprabhu smiled, even though he was severely wounded. "Our mission is complete," he said softly. His wounds were too deep, and he knew he wouldn't survive. But he was happy that Shivaji Maharaj was safe. Bajiprabhu took his last breath at Ghodkhind, surrounded by his fellow warriors. They mourned their leader, but knew that his bravery would never be forgotten. When Shivaji Maharaj heard about Bajiprabhu's sacrifice, he was deeply saddened, but he was also very proud. "Bajiprabhu is not gone," he said. "He lives on in every brave heart that fights for freedom." In honor of Bajiprabhu, Ghodkhind was renamed Pawankhind, which means sacred pass. To this day, the story of Bajiprabhu Deshpande and his heroic stand at Pawankhind inspires everyone. Let's salute brave warriors like Bajiprabhu with Har Har Mahadev!